Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I was still running calls when most of the city had already gone home and closed their doors. You would think a tow truck operator would be the first person to head for the hills when an illness starts turning neighbours into something else. But I kept seeing stalled cars up on the shoulders and panicked drivers standing by the guardrails, waving their phones in dead zones. It felt wrong to leave them. I'm 34. I've been pulling wrecks and jump-starting batteries since I was 17, and I don't scare easily when it's just machinery and problem-solving. People were the unknown part. People, and whatever this thing is that brought the calm, predictable rhythm of the interstate to a halt. My name is Evan Miller. I live in Reno, Oklahoma, off Country Club Road, not far from the Canadian River. Our shop sits near the I-40 on-ramp, a cinder block building with 2 service bays, a lean-to awning for shade, and a sign that used to light up in blue and red until the power started to flicker. We kept 2 trucks ready for calls, my Ford F350 with a wheel lift, amber light bar, and a 20,000 pound hydraulic winch, and an older international rollback that clattered even when it idled smooth. On the 3rd day, after local stations started using serious words, and the county emergency manager asked people to avoid hospitals unless it was life or death, our regular dispatchers stopped answering. We worked off a paper log and my small handheld. Calls started to come in over the shop's landline, and then the phone died, so folks just walked in. They left vehicles and keys, scratched notes on envelopes, and looked over their shoulders when they spoke to us, like the shadows were listening. That morning, I had breakfast at the truck stop on the northeast corner of I-40 and Highway 81. The coffee was still hot. The cook said the fuel station's generator would keep the griddle running. People spoke softly. The televisions were muted. I was washing my mug when the first emergency alert tone cut through the quiet. Those 3 long chirps that normally mean a tornado is dropping out of a wall cloud somewhere over Canadian County. Instead, the scrolling text said the state of Oklahoma was coordinating evacuation routes. Westbound I-40 was listed as a recommended corridor. Proceed westbound to Amarillo for federal evacuation, it said. The ticker kept repeating that phrase, and the station cut to a recorded message from a calm voice that sounded like it had been recorded during a drill. People around me looked at one another. A few nodded, like they had been given permission to do what they were already planning. Trucks fueled. Some paid, some didn't. I finished my coffee and drove back to the shop. Mike was there when I pulled in. He's my co-worker, 39, big-shouldered with a buzz cut. The kind of guy who can lift the heavy end of a transmission and joke while doing it. He was stacking steel mesh we'd cut from an old chain-link gate. Figured if folks are talking about westbound being open, we should button up your cab, he said. We measured the windows and riveted the mesh onto a frame that bolted to the inside door shells, so the glass could still roll down a little for communication, but nothing could force its way in. I had already welded a low-angle push bar to the front, not a full plough, just enough plate to guide bumpers aside without damaging radiator or steering. It wasn't pretty, but this wasn't a car show. Carla showed up before lunch. She's a nurse from Integris in Yukon. She had her scrubs on under a hoodie, her hair tied with a rubber band from a box of nitrile gloves. Her car, an older Chevy Suburban, was loaded with cases of bottled water, 2 5-gallon jerry cans, a duffel of medical supplies, and a cooler with ice packs. They diverted people in the waiting room yesterday, she told me quietly. It wasn't safe inside. There are messages saying go west. My sister's in Amarillo. I want to believe it's real. She looked like someone standing on a beach who can't tell if the wave is receding or rushing in. We needed another driver with experience if we were going to move more than 1 vehicle at a time. And that's when Henry walked in. Retired trucker, late 60s, white moustache, a baseball cap from a cattle auction, and a slow, steady way of looking at a situation like he's already seen 3 just like it. He had parked his last Freightliner 2 years ago and said he missed the way the highway unfolds at night. My brother's place is outside Shamrock on the Texas line, he said. Got a key to an old dry van in Weatherford. The company won't need it now. We can haul supplies if we're going to try this. The last to join was a kid named Trevor, 17, maybe 18, skinny, a hitchhiker with a backpack, a cheap folding bicycle strapped to it, and a skateboard tucked under his arm. He had been headed west from Oklahoma City to see a girlfriend in Gallup. He was trying to get to the main on-ramp to thumb a ride. When he heard we were building a convoy, he offered to sweep floors, fetch bolts, anything. I looked at his hands and saw grease under his nails. You work on things? I asked. Bikes mostly, he said. No stranger to a busted chain though. We laughed. We needed another set of eyes. We made the plan simple on purpose. 3 vehicles, 2 radios in each. My F-350 would run lead. Henry would take the Freightliner dry van if we could get it. If not, he'd drive the international rollback, and we would improvise. Carla would drive the Suburban as sweep, with Trevor riding shotgun to handle navigation and radio calls. We loaded the Suburban with food and water, 2 fire extinguishers, jumper cables, a first aid kit, and a folding stretcher a paramedic had handed off at the hospital's back exit. For the tow truck, I strapped down 3 5-gallon diesel cans, a milk crate of ratchet straps, a coil of grade 80 chain with a clevis hook, a snatch block, a breaker bar, 2 spare belts, and a box of fuses. I topped off the hydraulic fluid and checked the power steering hose for chafe. The last thing I wanted was to be bleeding power steering fluid while weaving through stalled cars. For communication, we kept it simple. I had a Cobra 29LX CB set with a magnetic mount whip antenna and a handheld VHF-UHF ham set a neighbour lent me when he left town. I tuned the CB to channel 19 as a default and agreed with Henry we'd go to 17 if interstate chatter was nonsense. Carla had a small handheld FRS unit and we paired it with Trevor's. We developed signals in case voice comms cut out. 2 short headlight flashes from sweep meant slow, hazard ahead. 1 long and 2 short from lead meant stop. We ran a test up the westbound on-ramp and back to get our timing down in case we needed to take a rolling gap in traffic. The traffic turned out to be the least of our problems. We pushed west toward Weatherford in the early afternoon, under a sky that looked washed out by a storm that never broke. We took the business route through Reno to avoid any big clusters at the main interchanges. The first thing I noticed was how quiet the world gets when every commercial sign goes dark at the same time. Gas price boards looked like broken calculators. The restaurant that always leaves its neon open sign on had nothing in the window but a black reflection of our convoy crawling past. The only thing that still flashed was the crossing gate at an empty rail siding, chewing electricity because that is what it was designed to do until someone told it otherwise. We found the Freightliner exactly where Henry said it would be, in a lot behind a farm supply store on the south side of Weatherford. The keys were in the ashtray of the cab. Henry climbed up like it was yesterday, ran the pre-trip by habit, air pressure in the tanks, lights, tyres, lug nuts, glad hand seals, and fired up the Detroit. The dry van was half full of palletized feed sacks, a stack of cardboard boxes, and a pair of portable totes marked potable water. Someone had the same thought before us, Henry said, but they didn't get far. We shuffled weight as best as we could to keep the trailer balanced, then added a pallet of bottled water and 2 boxes of canned goods from the farm supply that had its front door standing open and no one inside. We stopped in Clinton to top off diesel. The station on the south side near the old Route 66 museum still had power. The clerk had a sidearm on his hip, nodded, and kept the line moving. People were decisive and polite, a combination that only happens when everyone can see the same storm on the horizon. Carla grabbed a printed highway map inside. If GPS goes, at least we can still be smarter than a line on a screen, she said. She traced a finger across I-40, named the towns ahead, Elk City, Sayre, Eric, and then into Texas. If there's really a federal evacuation site in Amarillo, they'll want to bring people up from Lubbock and down from Dumas. It would be at the fairgrounds or the civic center. That's where they always put shelters. The radio message kept repeating every hour. The same voice, the same words, the same pacing. It said westbound I-40 was secure from milepost 120 to Amarillo. It said to proceed to designated reception points for a safety check and onward transportation. It gave no frequencies for a callback, no updates, no mention of conditions. Automated, Henry said. You can tell by the cadence, nobody checks it. It just loops. Past Elk City, the interstate widened into a landscape of grass and low hills where the wind never stops. We saw our first real evidence of how hard this thing had hit at mile marker 168. It wasn't the first wrecked vehicle we had passed. That had happened 10 miles prior. A car with its hood up, battery cables undone, trunk open, no owner nearby. It was the checkpoint. I've run support for accident scenes and seen how the National Guard sets a perimeter when there is a chemical spill or when they're helping with storm cleanup. What we rolled up on had been a deliberate effort to protect a population that never got the time it needed. 2 olive drab water buffalo tanks stood empty with their caps open. Spent brass littered the shoulder. A yellow roll of warning tape fluttered from a sawhorse barricade that someone had stacked into a pyramid as a last stand of order. The smell of diesel hung in the air without an engine running. Carla scanned. There, she said, pointing to the ditch, where 3 bodies lay side by side. They wore guard uniforms. They didn't move. We didn't get out. You don't get out unless you have to, not when you're exposed on a shoulder with the wind carrying your scent down the lanes like a flag. Mike had been quiet since we stopped in Clinton. He reached across the cab and turned down the radio. They're fresh, he said, eyes on the ditch. You can tell by the color. He caught himself and looked at me. I did a lot of accident recovery with you. You learn to read time in a different way. He was right. You learn the temperature of a hood, the tackiness of spilled fluids, the way a battery smells when it has just vented. The 3 in the ditch were not old. Whatever last hour they'd experienced had ended recently. We kept moving because movement is life on the interstate. You start to treat speed as a shield. The CB chattered with broken conversations. Drivers looking for shoulders to sleep on. A call for a tow 10 miles behind us that I knew I would not answer. Someone arguing about whether the radio message was a trap or a lifeline. We turned the squelch until only the most important words cut through. In the distance, the sky gained an unusual haze, like a field had been burned, and the smoke hung low because the wind had nowhere to push it. The exit signs for Sayre and Eric passed our windows. Sunlight slid toward late afternoon, without any of the warmth it should have had. The world was a photograph taken a fraction of a second too late. At dusk, we pulled into a turnoff at an overpass where an Oklahoma Department of Transportation maintenance yard used to keep salt and sand. The chain-link gate hung open, the small building's roll-up doors were down, and the padlock was missing, but still there on the ground, like someone had set it aside and forgotten. We used the yard's geometry to our advantage, putting my truck up against the entrance and tucking the Suburban and Freightliner behind me at angles where they could turn if we needed to exit fast. We wanted to top off fuel and check straps and see if anyone needed to stretch their legs. Henry climbed down from his cab and circled the Freightliner's trailer, tapping each tire with a wooden dowel. The sound told him air pressure if you know how to listen. He listened and nodded. That's when we saw the pileup 200 yards ahead, just beyond the crest of the overpass. A wall of vehicles welded together by accident and panic and momentum. You see them sometimes in winter when ice takes away friction and speed multiplies mistakes. This had a different shape. There were cars wedged under the back of a trailer, a pickup on its side with its bed rails bent, an RV with its door hanging open, and a box truck crosswise with its rear wheels off the ground. Nothing moved. Then something moved inside the RV. A shape in the dark space where a kitchen table should be. It hit the wall and bounced, then hit the wall again, methodical and patient. We talked fast. We can clear a lane, I said. We've done it before. We'll go slow and quiet. That last part was wishful thinking. Pulling metal across metal sings a song you can hear through closed windows. I backed the F350 up to a sedan at the edge of the stack and took the chain and a clevis hook and crawled low to the front lower control arm, because you always attach to a structural member if you can. Trevor handed me a folded carpet scrap we kept in the cab, and I draped it over the chain where it would be under tension, so if it snapped it would drop instead of whip. I backed in low range and felt the first stubborn inch give way. The sedan slid off the pavement with a scraping groan. The sound went out over the open concrete like a signal. In the mirror, I saw movement in the Freightliner's passenger mirror, shadows down the embankment that were not the wind. Mike climbed out with a pry bar and one of the shop's old fiberglass riot shields we used to use for tire blowout testing. Carla stood by my passenger door with a flashlight turned off, ready to flash signals if we missed something. Henry idled the semi, feet ready on clutch and brake. Trevor kept his head on a swivel with the handheld, calling out directions to keep us aligned. The first two cars came free with effort. The box truck had both rear wheels hanging, so we ran the winch line through a snatch block anchored to a highway post and used mechanical advantage to pull it sideways enough to drop the axle onto the asphalt. The steel cable hissed over the sheave and the winch motor whined and stuttered and then pushed through. I felt heat in the glove of my right hand from the friction, even though I wasn't touching anything metal. It's the kind of heat you only feel when a machine is operating at the boundary of what it was built to do. The noise woke the highway. It woke the RV, and it woke the shapes that had been trapped behind tempered glass and accident-jammed doors. A plastic sunroof popped free in a shower of bits, and a pair of hands found the opening, and then a face. It wasn't the face that startled me. By then, I had seen that look in people who don't know where they are in their own house after a fall. It was the sound that came out. It wasn't a call for help. It wasn't even a word. It was a persistent drive in vocal cords that didn't bother with sentences anymore. Another set of hands pulled against a cracked windshield 2 cars down. We had underestimated how much life was still inside this mechanical wall. "Back in," I said, louder than I meant to. Henry was already moving. He put the semi in gear and used its mass like a ship nosing through ice floes, taking a diagonal line that opened a path where my pickup couldn't. The trailer groaned. A mirror snapped. Sheet metal popped somewhere and flew like a thrown license plate. We had a long but narrow path going through, the kind you could slip the nose of a pickup into if you kept straight and didn't stop. Carla shouted my name. I turned in time to see figures coming up the ramp from the rest area. It hadn't looked occupied when we passed, but it only takes one group to light a small fire, and the smoke and noise become a beacon. A dozen at first, then more, some limping, some running, as if the last muscle memory they owned was the act of pursuit. I could feel the decision building in my chest. If we pushed through, we would make it to the other side. But we would leave the semi if it jammed, and we would leave the rest area as a knot of moving shapes that would eventually drift and find us again. "Go!" Mike shouted, shoving me toward the driver's door. He was bleeding from his forearm, a shallow cut, I thought, a deep scrape. He had wrapped it with a shop rag. "It's fine," he said. "I caught a shard." He flattened his voice the way trained people do to keep everyone calm. I put the truck in first and eased forward. The push bar shuddered as it kissed the edge of a bumper and slid it a foot. I heard Henry's engine spool. The Suburban tucked tight behind my back bumper. Trevor calling 2 left, 1 right, straight, straight. We were a train that couldn't stop, threading a tunnel made of cars. We might have made it clean if there hadn't been a jackknife. The dry van swung wide when Henry corrected around a compact with 2 wheels on the median, and the trailer's rear axle hopped the lip of the lane and tried to sit down in the dirt. It seized for a second, and then the angle turned against him. It jackknifed across the median like a metal gate dropped across a cattle chute. "I'm stuck," he said, not apologizing, just stating the most important truth. I can't bring it back without a second tractor pulling the trailer. I stopped too fast and nearly got the Suburban into my bumper. Carla's eyes appeared above the wheel. She already knew. There is a moment in any rescue where you understand you cannot save both the person and the gear, and you have to choose. Gear is replaceable, 999 times out of 1,000. Today, the gear had people's food and a pallet of potable water. Today, the gear was not a set of sockets or the toe strap your uncle gave you. We could have stayed with the semi and tried to fight for it. We did not. We pulled forward around the tractor as far as we could, put the Suburban in the clear, then backed the F350 until the push bar was against the Freightliner's front bumper. I used it as a wedge shield while Henry grabbed his logbook, his jacket, a small bag. He paused, looked back at the trailer, put his hand on the door latch like a man touching the shoulder of a friend in a hospital bed, then climbed down. He had tears in his eyes, plain and honest. "It's just metal," he said out loud, like a prayer, like something he needed to hear from outside his own mouth. We had only one place to go, and that was down. The overpass had a maintenance access tunnel to pass wiring and drainage from one side to the other. I'd seen crews use them after floods, carrying shovels through the doors with orange vests on. We ran for it. Carla led because she knew how to move a group in a hallway. "Hands on the person in front of you," she said. "Stay with contact. If you lose contact, stop and say your name." Mike held his arm tight to his body. He adjusted the wrap once and winced, but said nothing. The door to the tunnel was the thick metal type that sticks when humidity swells the frame. I shouldered it, and it gave a fraction, and then more, and then opened in a rush. The smell hit us, concrete that has been wet and then dry, old salt, a trace of oil. We shoved pallets and 2 empty propane cylinders into the gap after we were in. I don't know if it would really stop anything determined. It was something to do with our hands, so they would not shake. We were inside a concrete corridor, no wider than a pickup, lit only by the light that followed us in. The floor sloped gently. There was graffiti on the wall in paint that had dripped in thin lines. The letters were steady, and the words were not written in a hurry. "The radio lies. Amarillo is gone." Underneath it, a date from 2 days ago. We stared at it like it might explain itself. Henry leaned back against the wall, breathing slow. Trevor set down his pack and unzipped it. He had 2 headlamps and a bag of batteries. He handed one to me and one to Carla, more prepared than he had any right to be at his age. We clicked them on, and the tunnel went from cave to workplace. I checked my CB. The speaker hissed. Concrete is not friendly to radio waves. I switched to the handheld ham, turned the squelch back until noise entered, and scanned. 2 frequencies burst into life like someone had just tuned them for me. One was a voice near Elk City, rambling, someone alone. The other was a voice that kept saying the same thing every minute. "If you can hear me, please respond. We're in Amarillo. We need help." It sounded panicked. It sounded like a teenager with a cracked voice. It sounded alive. I keyed the mic and said my name and location. "We can't get through the pile-up on westbound," I said. "Is there a route around?" There was silence on the other end for a second, and then the voice came back smaller. "I'm in my dad's office in a storage unit near South Coulter," he said, words coming fast. "They told us to come to the Civic Center, but when we got there, it was empty and the doors were locked, and there were cars with the doors open and no one around. And then they said, go to the fairgrounds, and there were people there in the morning and in the afternoon. It was quiet. The radio tells people to come, but there's no one here to meet them. I've been hitting transmit every minute to see if anyone will answer." He sniffed hard and tried to be brave. He sounded like any kid I've met who is determined to not cry in front of adults. "Is there a way to bypass the big crash near the state line?" I asked. "There's always a farm road. There's always a frontage." The kid paused. Then I could hear fingers on a keyboard and the paper shuffle that meant he had a map or he was making one. "You can get off at 5 and go around through the old Route 66, he said. "But there's a bunch of cars before Texola and then again at the Welcome Center, and I heard a voice there last night that didn't sound like anyone I know. It just kept saying to turn around." His breathing changed again. "I don't know if the city is gone, but there's no one answering the phones who used to answer the phones." Mike sat down slowly on the concrete and leaned his head against the wall. "How do you feel?" Carla asked. "Fine," he said, then swallowed. His skin was slick with sweat in the way someone looks an hour into a fever. She touched his forehead with the back of her hand, the gesture automatic from 1,000 night shifts. She tugged gently at the rag on his arm. He pulled back, then forced himself to hold still. When she unwrapped it, we saw the scrape was not just a scrape. Something had torn the skin deeper than you get from a jagged edge. It wasn't pouring blood. It had the wrong look to it. Carla's face changed very slightly. She did not make a sound. She applied a sterile pad and wrapped it tighter with gauze and a strip of athletic tape. She looked at me, and I understood. She didn't need to say anything out loud. We had all seen enough in the last week to know what a bad wound can mean. The door rattled behind the makeshift barricade. We froze. It rattled again, steady, testing. The gap we had left was small. It wouldn't hold forever if something heavy and persistent wanted in. We needed another way out that did not involve opening the door we had just closed. I swept the headlamp along the wall. There was a smaller metal hatch halfway down the tunnel with a faded sticker that said, "Drainage Access." The bolts were rusted but intact. The latch was stiff, but moved when I threw my shoulder against it. The hatch opened to a concrete culvert that ran under the slope and out into a shallow ditch with scrub grass and wind. "We go now," Henry said, voice even, as if he were telling us mile markers, as if this were just another night run to the West Texas line. I looked at Mike. He nodded at me like men do when they want you to stop worrying about them. "Don't make me say it," he added, with a small smile that didn't touch his eyes. We moved crouched in the culvert, our bags low so they wouldn't scrape. On the far side, we shielded our exit with a piece of plywood that had washed into the ditch sometime in the last storm. We stayed low until we were 100 yards from the overpass, and then risked a stand to look back. It looked like a ruin from some other world, where cars stack themselves and people vanish mid-errand. The small shape of something finding a gap in the barricade at the maintenance door made my stomach feel like I had swallowed a battery. We turned and started across the open prairie, toward the line of power poles that run like a compass needle west to Texas. We walked until the sun painted everything a flat orange and then grey. The wind made a sound in the short grass that I'd never heard before, as if the whole field were exhaling and waiting to hear if anything answered. We did not talk much. We conserved water. We kept our lines of sight long and clean. The Suburban was back in the yard with the Freightliner, and the F-350 was pinned by a wall of shapes that would lose interest and tow themselves onto some other echo by morning. We had left behind food and fuel, and a rolling toolbox that could have kept a small town going for a week, but we had our heads clear and our legs and a straight back to put into the next mile. When we stopped, we did it in a shallow bowl of land between the interstate and a low pasture. We chose it because the line of sight to all four sides was good, and because the ground had a little give to it. Easy to hide footprints if we needed. It felt too open and too exposed at the same time. That is the sensation of the plains. You can see forever and hide nowhere. We ate quietly. One can of chicken split among four with crackers, and we listened to the handheld radio. Static, occasional voices, one phrase that cut through, avoid the main corridor, then silence again. The kind of quiet that makes you realize how loud your own breathing is. Carla watched Mike out of the corner of her eye. He had pulled the sleeve of his jacket down over the dressing, but he could not keep his hand from drifting to it. "How long?" she asked him in a gentle voice that was professional only because it had to be. He did math in his head. 2 hours, he said, then said, "Maybe 3, as if that would take him out of the worst of it. Henry stared at the horizon, hands folded, like he was waiting for a storm line he could outrun if he timed it right. Trevor lay back with his pack under his head and looked up at the first stars with the expression of someone who had only seen them through a windshield until now. We slept in shifts because that's what you do when you can't afford to miss something. You put an alarm on your watch, or you let the cold wake you, and in the few hours you trust someone else's eyes, you dream of the last normal thing you saw. I dreamed about the feel of the tow truck's steering wheel in my hands, and how the road hums through the tires. At first light we moved again, The sun comes up fast on the prairie, and it doesn't ask your permission. The radio had a burst of life. A voice much like the one before, but clearer, older. "If you are headed to Amarillo, do not come in on the interstate," it said. "City services are not operational. Use farm roads, avoid groups." There was a short pause, and then the voice added, more personal, "If you are near South Coulter and Ross, there is a storage unit with a green roll-up door with a white number 7 painted on it. Knock twice, wait, then once. If anyone hears this, I'm trying to keep the lights on as long as the generator has fuel." The transmission ended not with a sign-off, but like someone had finished the breath they had been holding and needed to do something with their hands. I answered, "This is Evan. We are on foot. We had to abandon our vehicles near the state line. We can make miles, but we need to know whether we're walking into a place that can't feed or water any more people." The reply did not come immediately. When it did, the voice had the tone of a person who shoulders responsibility without having asked for it. "If you come quiet," he said. "I can get you water. I can't promise anything after that." We angled away from the interstate and took fence lines that would carry us past farm ponds and windbreaks. The land out here is cut into rectangles by section line roads, and if you know how to read them, you can travel with your head up. We used old windmills as landmarks and moved when the wind did, so our footsteps kept a rhythm with something other than nerves. We saw one small herd of cattle pressed tight into the tiny shade of a cedar, and they watched us with the casual curiosity of creatures who do not know the structure of human emergencies. By mid-morning, Mike was lagging. He tried to hide it, but you can't hide from people who walked a second shift with you for years. His hands shook once when he took a water bottle. He tightened his jaw to stop it. "I'm good," he said. "We can slow a little, but don't stop." He tried to tell a story about a blown turbo on a Ford we picked up outside Hinton last winter. How the owner insisted it just needed fuel. He didn't finish the story. It trailed off because stories require a clear mind to keep all the parts in order. Carla dropped back to walk next to him. She took his elbow when we climbed a shallow grade. She kept her other hand on her radio. Trevor ranged ahead by 50 yards, then circled back. Then ran a perpendicular line in a field to see if a farmhouse we could barely see had any sign of life. He moved like a bird dog. Henry and I kept the center. We did not say out loud that we were making a different plan if Mike could not continue, but every step we took, we also measured the distance back to the last culvert and the last barn we saw with a door intact in case we needed to improvise shade or quiet. He made it another mile. Then he sat down without warning, like his legs belonged to someone else. He looked up at me with embarrassment. "I need a minute," he said. "I hate this." Carla knelt and checked the dressing. The gauze had drawn through with a faint dark, and his skin was hot. "I need to be honest with you," she said to him, calm and clear. "If this follows the pattern I've seen, the best thing for you and for them is that you don't fight yourself when the time comes. It's easier if we do it kindly." She put her hand on his shoulder, an anchoring touch. Mike nodded. He put his hands together like he was going to pray, but he didn't. "Please don't let me hurt anybody," he said, voice steady but quiet, like he was asking me to grab the far end of a transmission and not pinch my fingers. We chose a stand of scrub trees by a dry creek. We set him down in the shade. He wanted to look at the sky. Henry knelt next to him and told him about the miles he used to run at night when the desert air feels like cool water on your face through the open vent window. "You'll like it," he said. "It's a straight run." I sat by Mike's shoulder and told him the exact plan, that Carla would stay with him, that Henry and I would wait 10 yards away with the means to keep everyone safe if reflexes took over, that Trevor would go fetch water. I said the plan out loud, not because he needed to hear it, but because I did. Saying the plan makes the plan more real, and that reduces fear. He squeezed my forearm once. He closed his eyes. He rested. Time stretches in moments like that. A bird called in the distance. The wind changed. A cloud took a minute to pass in front of the sun, and then continued on. When it happened the way Carla said, quietly. She handled it with the grace of someone who has sat beside a lot of beds. Henry did what needed doing when it was time to keep everyone safe, and he did it with dignity. I will not put details here because there is no reason to. I will only say that my friend did not hurt anyone, and we kept our promise to him. We covered him with his jacket and fashioned a small marker from stones that lay nearby. We did not linger. We have memories for lingering. The ground is for moving. We were 3 when we crossed into Texas. There was no fanfare and no welcome sign. The state line out here is a line on a map and a subtle change in the way the fence posts weather. I did not feel anything about it either way. A border is just where one set of people paints their signs a different colour. The wind blows the same on both sides. We stayed off the main lanes and used old Route 66, where it broke away from the Interstate and ran through towns that used to sell souvenirs to travellers who wanted a picture by a shield on a pole. Shamrock's water tower still said Shamrock in letters you could see from the lane. The U-Drop Inn had its Art Deco lines intact and its glass doors chained. We filled bottles at a spigot behind a mechanic's garage where the hose still had pressure. We took what we needed and left what we could not carry. We left money even though money doesn't mean anything in the first days of a situation like this. It felt like the right part of a ritual. You pay for what you use because it makes you feel like you still live in a world where paying means something. The further west we walked, the more obvious it became that the radio message was not a person. It was a tape loop. It said, "Proceed to the Civic Center." Even after the Civic Center was dark, it said, "Follow the posted signs." After people had knocked signs down with their bumpers. Every hour on the hour, the same tone, the same calm, the same invitation. I started to hate the voice because it sounded so much like authority but had no weight behind it. Authority without weight is just echo. On the outskirts of Amarillo, we stopped. Back in a stand of cottonwoods, by a decommissioned rail spur. We listened. Sound moves different in a city. It bounces, and it hides in corners. We heard nothing that would tell us there was a crowd or a working shelter, no generator hum, no loudspeaker, just the rattle of metal when the wind hits a loose sign. We took a long arc to the south to aim for South Coulter. The side streets were full of cars parked as if the owners had gotten out and not come back. You learn to read abruptness, a driver's door still open, a purse on a seat, a bag of groceries that had punched through the bottom of its paper and rolled a box of crackers into the footwell. We did not pick up anything in those cars because the cars felt like rooms in a house that someone might still come back to. A silly thought, but human. Our world was shrinking to a series of choices, and each choice was a line drawn on the map of who we wanted to remain. The storage units were newer construction, the kind of place people used to store Christmas decorations and law firm files. The roll-up doors were painted green, neat rows. The number 7 was stenciled in white where the man on the radio said it would be. We approached slowly, hands visible, heads up. I put the radio to my mouth and said, "This is Evan, 3 adults approaching. We are not sick. We will knock twice, wait, then once." We did it exactly like that. The first knock echoed. The pause stretched. Then we heard the sound of a latch, and the door lifted enough to see boots, then shins, then a face. He was maybe 23, hair buzzed short, eyes too old. Behind him was a small space that he had turned into a workable room. A cot, a folding table, a battery on a trickle charger wired to a portable generator, a rack with bottles of water he had inventoried with a marker. On the wall was a printed list in block letters: fuel, water, radio, door, light. He had written the date and the fuel level and the battery level next to each. There were 4 empty energy drink cans in a neat row, not crushed, just finished. I liked him immediately because he had made order and did not apologize for it. "I'm Daniel," he said. "My dad owns this place. He had a heart condition. He and my mum went as soon as they told people to go to the Civic Center. They said they would meet me there if I closed up. I've been talking on the radio since then." He looked down for a second, like he was inspecting a scratch on the floor, then looked up again with effort. No one is at the civic center, he said. No one has been there since yesterday morning. The fairgrounds had a few people. They moved, I don't know where. We stepped inside one at a time and closed the door behind us. We didn't all sit. Henry stayed by the door by instinct, part guard and part doorman, in case we had to leave fast. Carla checked the generator, then checked the exhaust line. You have it rigged right, she said. But if we get another person in here, we should move this outside and build a baffle so it's quieter. Daniel nodded like he'd been waiting for someone to tell him the next practical improvement. Do you have anyone else? I asked. He shook his head. I had 2 people the first night. They were doing okay and then they weren't. I kept the door closed. I didn't open it after that. He swallowed. I think I did the right thing. I don't know. He was here and alive, and no one was hurt in this room. That was the only score I was keeping. We spent an hour making the place better. We moved the generator behind the unit into a plywood hushbox that Daniel had started and never finished. We cut an intake on one side and an exhaust on the other, then ran the muffler through flex pipe and secured it with wire so it wouldn't vibrate. We put rubber under the generator feet to damp the resonance. We rewired the battery charger and the inverter so we could switch to batteries silently and only start the generator when needed. We pulled the antenna wire higher and ran it to a piece of metal conduit Daniel had zip-tied to the corner of the building. It didn't make the radio perfect, but it gave us another bar of signal on the handheld, and sometimes that one bar is the difference between a sentence and a word. We ate. We drank water. We made a plan to sleep in 2 shifts. Daniel watched us with a look I recognized, a mix of hope and fear of losing. We don't have to stay long, I said, more to us than to him. We can't. 3 people can move faster than 6. We won't save a city, but we can do what we can with the people in our line of sight. We took turns on the radio that night. We did not broadcast long messages, just short clarifications. Avoid the main corridor. Use frontage roads. Do not drive into crowds. If you're in the city, move in 2s and 3s. If you have fuel to spare, leave it where someone can find it. We did not speak like we were authorities. We spoke like mechanics giving instructions over the phone to someone with a broken alternator who is 30 miles from the shop and still needs to get home. At 2:15 a.m., I heard a voice I knew before he said his name. This is Henry, the radio said, but Henry was sitting next to me. He frowned. Then the voice continued. If anyone finds a Freightliner with a white dry van near mile marker 172, north side of the median, it's got water and food. We had to leave it. Take what you need. Please close the doors when you're done so some of it stays good. It was my voice recorded earlier on the handheld. Trevor had clipped the microphone when I mentioned the trailer so we could broadcast the location when we got to range. He pressed the button now and then to let it play again. Simple, smart. We slept in a strange rhythm that has nothing to do with night or day and everything to do with trust. I dreamed again about the tow truck. This time about the sound of the winch under load and the moment when the cable sings as it takes tension. My body woke me at 4:45 a.m. I sat up and listened. Nothing outside but the sound of wind and something metal ticking as it cooled. Carla sat with her back against the roll-up door, eyes open, resting without sleeping. She nodded. She did not look like a nurse off shift anymore. She looked like someone who has made triage into a philosophy. In the morning, we moved again. We did not do it because we were ungrateful for Daniel's shelter. We did it because you cannot be still in a situation that rewards motion. He understood. He told us where to find a smaller storage unit near a stand of trees if we needed to lay low in the afternoon. He showed us the inventory board again and added a column that said Evan, Carla, Henry, Trevor, and under it, the number of liters of water each of us had left. Not because he wanted to track us, but because he wanted us to track ourselves. That is the difference between control and accountability. One pushes, one invites. We built our next day as a set of legs, each with a stop that included a way to hide if necessary and a source of water. We found a municipal tap at a maintenance building behind a baseball diamond and filled from it. then used chlorine tablets sparingly to be safe. We found a vending machine in a lobby with a broken glass that had not been emptied, and we took 2 items each and left the rest because other people walk behind you. We avoided the sound of any crowd. We crossed one wide street where the asphalt was scarred by rubber from sudden stops, and we scanned all 4 directions before stepping into the open. You do it like checking a rail crossing in farm country. Slow down, look both ways, listen, cross only when you can see far. The radio told us more truths we didn't need, but received anyway. A volunteer group had taken over a church south of the loop. A family had shelter in a construction site and needed formula. A man with a bass voice was offering rides west in a flatbed, and it felt wrong to listen to his patter. You can hear motive, even without words. We set our handheld to scan and decided as a rule we would not respond to any voice that asked for more than it offered. At midday, we cut back north to see if the old airport hangars had any hangar doors that could be closed with a person inside. The smaller ones did not. The larger ones had locks we did not want to break. We kept moving. We are not looters, I thought, and then caught myself because one day the line will blur and I will have to draw it with a new pen. The second night we spent in a storage unit like Daniel's, but closer to the edge of town. We closed the door and sat with our backs to the cool metal. We ate quietly. Henry told us a story about a blizzard on New Mexico's high plain when he had moved his rig 2 miles with chains on the tires and not seen a single mile marker. I sang to myself so I would have a timeline, he said, and he hummed a little. It was a simple tune that did not speak of anything but forward motion. I lay down and watched the shadows draw lines on the metal ceiling. I thought about the signs we had all ignored in our normal lives that would have made things easier if we had listened. This morning, for example, I wouldn't have left the Freightliner's keys in the ignition out of habit. I would have put them in the glove compartment in case someone with a tractor needed to move the trailer. I would have dropped a printed list of useful frequencies in the glove box of every vehicle I worked on. I would have taken the time to label every hose and wire in my own house. The mind looks for things it can fix because there is so much you cannot. On the 3rd day, we turned away from Amarillo entirely. The city was not dead, but it wasn't awake either. It had that feeling a building has after closing hours when the lights are dim and you hear the mechanical systems working, but no voices. We walked west, not because the radio told us to, because west was where the horizon was pulling in a clean line, and because we had people we could help along that line. We followed the empty power lines like they were an old trail that our grandparents once walked and then forgot to pass down. We were not heroes. We were not an emergency crew dispatched by an agency with a patch on a sleeve. We were 3 people who had carried a 4th as far as we could, and then carried his memory further. We stopped towards sunset on a low rise that let us see the ribbon of Interstate unspool beyond sight. In the distance, a column of smoke marked something. We watched it like sailors watch the shape of a cloud for weather. Tomorrow, we make the state line to New Mexico if we keep our pace, Henry said, then corrected himself. We don't have to make it that far in one go. He looked tired in the honest way a man does when his body has worked all day and he is ready to sleep. We did not say a blessing over our meal. We did not speak the names of the places we had left. We just ate and drank water and checked our gear and our radio and our laces. I looked at my hands and saw grease in the lines that will never come out. It was a comfort. It meant I am still who I was before I stepped into this new work. When the wind shifted and the sound of the highway washed over us like a tide, it carried with it the faintest echo of the message that had started us moving. Westbound I-40 is secure. Proceed to Amarillo for federal evacuation. I clicked the radio off. We make our own messages now, I said. We lay down under a sky that had more stars than I remembered. We were 3 people under a big west, with a plan for the morning and a world that had traded promises for small, true acts. We closed our eyes without metaphors and without speeches, and we slept. Because the best way to keep moving is to rest when you can, and get up when the light comes. The next days blurred into a process that felt like a job, and that was good. Work is medicine. We woke at first light, walked, found water, avoided crowds, listened. We made contact with 2 farmers driving a gator along a pivot road who traded us carrots for a spare fuel filter Henry had in his jacket pocket. We showed a small group how to siphon safely without swallowing anything. If you had a hand pump and a clear line, we wrote the Freightliner's location on a sheet of cardboard and nailed it to a post at a rest area entrance so others could find it. We left notes under windshield wipers with a grease pencil, simple arrows and short words like water and quiet and left. We avoided any situation that drew attention to itself. That was our entire doctrine. Move like water when it flows along the bank, not like water when it roars in flood. Somewhere near Adrian, we met a woman named Nora and her son at a roadside picnic area. She was trying to figure out if she should go back east to find a sister in Oklahoma City or keep going to a cousin's place in Albuquerque. We helped her decide by framing the question in concrete terms. Fuel range, known safe stops, the likelihood of finding people you know at one location versus the other. We gave her a map and a highlighter, and she drew a line that brought her more relief than any hug could have. People don't need speeches. They need lines on paper and someone to say the line is honest. By the time we crossed into New Mexico, we had settled into roles we didn't choose, but wore like clothes that fit. Henry was our navigator and barometer. He could smell a storm coming or a crowd. Carla was our medic and our conscience, the person who asked if our pace was about pride or safety. I was our mechanic and quiet planning voice. Trevor was our runner, scout and morale, even on the days the light didn't catch him the way it had when we met. He found tools where none should have been, and always seemed to know when to say the exact sentence that made a hard choice feel manageable. We did not talk about Amarillo much. The graffiti in the overpass tunnel had said the radio lied and that the city was gone. It was half right. The radio wasn't lying because the radio can't lie. It only repeats. The city wasn't gone because a city isn't buildings or a civic center or a fairground. A city is people who find a Daniel and gather around him and build a hushbox for the generator and make a list that says fuel, water, radio, door, light, and then check it in the morning. We had seen that spirit in a storage unit with a green door and a white number 7. It was enough for me to believe that when we were gone, there would be another list on another wall somewhere else, and another person who doesn't apologize for putting it there. On the 5th morning since we left the Freightliner, the radio carried a new voice we hadn't heard before. It was a woman with a direct way of speaking, relaying information without extra words, like a dispatcher at the start of a shift. "If you hear this, you are on a good path," she said. "Avoid big roads. Head for the small. Leave notes. Share what you can. If you can't share, at least don't waste." She did not say her name. She did not claim authority. She did not tell us to go to Amarillo or Santa Rosa or anywhere else. She said, "There is no convoy coming to save you. You are the convoy." And then she clicked off. I smiled and handed the radio to Henry. He listened, nodded, and handed it to Carla. She nodded and handed it to Trevor. He grinned in the way someone does when a phrase hits the exact right place in the brain. None of us looked back. We stepped onto the next mile with our heads up and our packs snug to our shoulders. The power lines ran straight into the morning like a pencil line on a map. We followed them, not because a broadcast told us to, but because we had made a rule with ourselves that when there is a simple, honest line available, you take it. We said nothing else. We did not need to. We had a plan, we had a pace, and we had each other, which in this new work is more than most get and exactly enough. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.